The sound of the taser crackled through the silent courtroom, followed by the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. Officer Brooke Harlan stood over the man she had just assaulted, a smug grin plastered on her face. She thought he was just another thug who didn't belong in the front row. She thought she was untouchable, but as the man in the frayed hoodie slowly lifted his head, wiping blood from his lip, the doors to the courtroom burst open. A team of federal marshals stormed in, guns drawn, not at him, but at her. In that terrifying split second, Brooke realized she hadn't just attacked a defendant. She had just assaulted the most powerful man in the state. And he wasn't looking for mercy. He was looking for a reckoning. The air conditioning in the Crowley County Municipal Court felt like it had never worked properly. The air was thick, smelling of stale coffee, floor wax, and the nervous sweat of dozens of people waiting for their names to be called. Tension hung heavy in the room as Officer Brooke Harlan adjusted her heavy utility belt, wincing as the leather dug into her hip. She had been a bailiff in this court for years, and in her mind, she ran the place. She decided who sat where, who got to speak, and who got thrown out. She wasn't just security, she was the gatekeeper, and Brooke didn't like it when people didn't respect the gate. She scanned the room with practiced disdain. It was the usual crowd for arraignment court. Traffic violators, petty thieves, tired public defenders looking at their watches, and anxious families clutching rosary beads. Then the heavy oak doors at the back swung open. A man walked in. He was a tall African American with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe. But it wasn't his size that caught Brooke's attention. It was his attire. He was wearing a faded charcoal gray hoodie with a small tear near the pocket, loose-fitting jeans that looked stained with soil, and muddy work boots. He looked like he had just come from a construction site or a landscaping job. He paused, taking off a pair of dark sunglasses, revealing sharp, observant eyes that swept across the room. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look down at the floor like most defendants did. He looked calm, too calm. Brooke narrowed her eyes. She hated hoodies in her courtroom. The man walked down the center aisle, his boots making a heavy clump sound on the linoleum. Most people in his dress code headed for the back benches, trying to disappear. But this man didn't stop. He walked past the gallery, past the bar, and sat directly in the first row of the reserved section. The cushioned bench, specifically designated for visiting attorneys and high-ranking law enforcement. Brooke felt a vein throb in her neck. The audacity. She didn't wait. She marched down the aisle, her hand resting instinctively on her baton. The courtroom chatter died down as the regulars noticed Brooke on the warpath. She stopped right in front of the man, casting a shadow over him. "You!" she barked, her voice echoing off the cheap wood paneling. "Get up." The man looked up slowly. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her with a steady, unreadable expression. "Excuse me." His voice was deep, resonant, and surprisingly articulate. "You heard me," Brooke snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the back of the room. "This row is for officers of the court and attorneys. Defendants sit in the back. Move it." The man didn't move. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm not a defendant, officer. I'm here to observe the proceedings." "Observe from the back," Brooke hissed, leaning in closer. She wanted to intimidate him. It usually worked. "I don't know who you think you are. walking in here dressed like a vagrant. But we have rules. This serves as your one warning. I see plenty of empty seats, the man said calmly, gesturing to the vacant bench. And there are no signs indicating this is reserved seating. I'm comfortable here. A ripple of whispers went through the courtroom. Nobody talked back to Brooke Harlan. Not if they wanted their case to go smoothly. Brooke's face flushed a blotchy red. It wasn't just disobedience. It was the humiliation of being challenged publicly by someone she deemed beneath her. She looked him up and down, sneering at his muddy boots. Listen to me, pal. She lowered her voice to a menacing growl. I don't care if you're comfortable. You're disrupting my court. You either move your ass to the back row with the rest of the riffraff, or I drag you out of here for disorderly conduct. Your choice. The man held her gaze for a long, tense moment. Disorderly conduct requires a disruption of peace or a threat to safety. He cited, as if reading from a textbook. Sitting quietly in a public courtroom constitutes neither. I suggest you step back, Officer Harlan. He knew her name. Brooke froze for a second. She glanced at her badge. It was visible. Sure, but nobody ever read it. They just heard the uniform. The way he said it, Officer Harlan, didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a warning, but Brooke was too far gone to heed warnings. Her ego was in the driver's seat, and her foot was heavy on the gas. That's it, she said, reaching for her radio. I'm not playing games with you. She clicked the mic. Central, I've got a 1016 in courtroom 4. Refusal to comply, requesting backup for removal. The man shook his head slightly, a look of disappointment crossing his face. You're making a mistake. That's Officer Harlan to you, she shouted, causing several people in the back to jump. At that moment, the side door opened and the court clerk, a jittery young man named Elliot, poked his head out. Officer Harlan, Judge Garrick is ready to take the bench. Is everything okay? No, it's not, Brooke shouted, not taking her eyes off the man in the hoodie. I've got an agitator refusing to follow protocol. Tell the judge to give me a few minutes to clear the trash. The man in the hoodie stood up then. He towered over her. Trash, he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously cold. Is that how you refer to the citizens of this county? I call it like I see it, Brooke spat. Then you need to get your eyes checked, the man said. The tension in the room was electric. Every eye was glued to the confrontation. The temperature in the standoff had just hit freezing. Brooke's hand drifted from her baton to the taser on her belt. She was looking for a reason. Any reason. And the man in the hoodie knew it. The silence in the courtroom was shattered by the screech of a chair leg. As the man in the hoodie stood his ground, he didn't advance. He didn't raise his fists, but his sheer presence seemed to push Brooke back. Sit down, Brooke screamed, her hand now fully gripping the yellow handle of her taser. I am leaving, the man said calmly. If my presence in the front row is such a disturbance to your fragile order, I will leave the courtroom entirely. He turned to walk away, moving toward the center aisle. It was a de-escalation move. He was walking away. Any reasonable officer would have let him go, muttered a curse under their breath, and called it a win. But Brooke Harlan wasn't reasonable. She was vindictive. I didn't say you could leave, she yelled. The adrenaline was pumping through her system now, clouding her judgment. In her mind, him walking away was another act of defiance. He was turning his back on her authority. Stop right there. You are being detained. The man stopped, and turned halfway around, a look of genuine confusion on his face. Detained for what crime? Resisting a lawful order and disorderly conduct. Brooke lunged forward. She didn't go for his arm to guide him. She went for his hoodie, grabbing the fabric near his neck and yanking him backward. The man stumbled, caught off guard by the physical aggression. "Get your hands off me," he shouted, his composure cracking for the first time. He instinctively pulled his arm back to break her grip, a natural defensive reaction. "Assault! He's assaulting an officer!" Brooke shrieked, playing to the gallery that was watching. She didn't hesitate. She drew the taser, aimed it at his chest from less than 3 feet away, and pulled the trigger. Pop! Hiss! The 2 probes shot out, embedding themselves into the thick fabric of the gray hoodie. The man's body went rigid as 50,000 volts of electricity surged through him. A collective gasp, followed by screams, erupted from the gallery. The man groaned, his knees buckling. He crashed to the floor, convulsing. It was a violent, brutal sight. "Yeah, stay down," Brooke yelled, dropping the taser cartridge and reaching for her handcuffs. She didn't check if he was breathing. She didn't check if he had hit his head on the bench on the way down, which he had. A nasty gash opened up above his eyebrow, blood beginning to pool on the linoleum. She jumped on his back, driving her knee into his spine with unnecessary force. The man was dazed, groggy from the shock, barely moving. "Stop fighting! Stop resisting!" she screamed, even though he was lying perfectly still, face pressed against the dirty floor. She wrenched his arms behind his back, twisting his shoulders to the popping point, and slapped the cuffs on so tight the metal bit into his skin. "You picked the wrong day and the wrong cop, buddy," she hissed into his ear, spittle flying from her mouth. By now, the courtroom was in chaos. Several people in the back row had their phones out recording. A young public defender, Eleanor Grant, rushed forward from the bar. "Officer Harlan, stop. He's not resisting," Eleanor yelled, her eyes wide with horror. "You tased him. He was leaving. Back off, counselor, unless you want a pair of bracelets too," Brooke snapped, her chest heaving. She hauled the man up by the handcuffs, forcing him to his feet. He swayed, blood trickling down his face, dripping onto the property of Crowley County logo on his hoodie. The man's eyes were groggy, but as they focused on Brooke, the fire in them hadn't gone out. It had turned into something else, something terrifyingly final. "You," he rasped, his voice rough. "You have just made the last mistake of your career." "Shut up." Brooke shoved him toward the holding cell door adjacent to the jury box. "Tell it to the judge." Just then, Judge Vance Garrick finally entered. He was an older man, weary and indifferent, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee. He looked at the blood on the floor, the man in cuffs, and the flushed bailiff. "Brooke, what in God's name is going on?" Garrick sighed, more annoyed by the delay than the violence. "We had a situation, Your Honor," Brooke said, straightening her uniform, assuming the posture of the hero. "This individual entered the restricted area, refused lawful commands to vacate, became belligerent, and then physically assaulted me when I attempted to escort him out. I had to deploy non-lethal force to subdue the threat." She lied as easily as she breathed. Judge Garrick looked at the man. He saw the hoodie. He saw the mud on the boots. He saw the blood. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a nuisance. "Is this true?" Garrick asked the man, though he didn't wait for an answer. "She's lying," the man said, spitting a little blood onto the floor. I demand to make a phone call immediately. You're in no position to demand anything. Garrick waved his hand dismissively. Take him to holding. We'll arraign him last. Let him cool off. Your Honor, please. Eleanor Grant, the public defender, stepped in again. I saw the whole thing. He was walking away. This is police brutality. Sit down, Miss Grant, Garrick snapped, or I'll hold you in contempt. I trust Officer Harlan's judgment. Get him out of my sight. Brooke grinned. It was the smile of the victor. She shoved the man through the heavy metal door leading to the holding cells. As the door slammed shut, separating the man from the courtroom, Brooke leaned against it, catching her breath. She felt powerful. She had neutralized the threat. She had won. She had no idea that the man she had just beaten, tased, and thrown into a cage was Marcus Kane. And Marcus Kane wasn't just observing the court. He was the newly appointed State Attorney General, and he had come to Crowley County specifically to investigate rumors of corruption and abuse of power in Judge Garrick's courtroom. Brooke hadn't just assaulted a suspect. She had assaulted the man who signed her precinct's funding checks. Inside the holding cell, Marcus Kane sat on the cold concrete bench. His head throbbed and his wrists burned. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to center himself. He didn't scream. He didn't bang on the bars. He waited, because Marcus knew something Brooke didn't. His security detail, 2 undercover federal marshals who were parking the car when he went in early, would be wondering why he hadn't texted them the all clear. They would be coming in soon, and when they did, hell was coming with them. In the courtroom, the buzz of adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by the dull drone of Judge Garrick calling the first case on the docket. Brooke Harlan was standing by the bailiff station, wiping her hands with sanitizer. She felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and annoyance. She had put a thug in his place, but now she had to do paperwork on the use of force. She looked over at Elliot the clerk. Make sure you note that he lunged, Brooke whispered loudly. And that I gave 3 verbal warnings. I didn't hear 3, Elliot stammered, looking down at his keyboard. You heard 3, Brooke said, her voice dropping to that dangerous low growl she used to intimidate inmates. Unless you want to explain to the lieutenant why you were contradicting a senior officer. Elliot swallowed hard and typed. Defendant ignored 3 verbal commands. Just then, the double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They flew open with such force that one of them cracked against the interior wall. The sound was like a gunshot. Heads whipped around. Judge Garrick looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. What is the meaning of? 2 men stormed in. They were not local police. They moved with a terrifying predatory grace that screamed federal. They wore sharp navy blue suits that cost more than Brooke made in a month. They had earpieces coiling down their necks, and their hands were resting near their waistbands. The man on the left was built like a tank, with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. This was Special Agent Derek Ford. The man on the right was leaner, with wire-rimmed glasses and a look of absolute cold calculation. That was Agent Nolan Pierce. They didn't look at the judge. They didn't look at the gallery. Their eyes locked onto Brooke Harlan. Who is the bailiff in charge? Ford barked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Brooke stepped forward, puffing out her chest. She was used to being the biggest dog in the yard. She didn't realize wolves had just entered the building. I am Officer Harlan, and you can't just barge in here while court is in. Where is he? Ford cut her off, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. Where is who? Brooke scoffed, resting her hand on her belt near her taser. You need to lower your tone, sir, or... Ford moved so fast, Brooke didn't even process it. One moment he was a few feet away, the next he was in her face. His badge flashed so close to her nose, she went cross-eyed. State Bureau of Investigation, Dignitary Protection Unit, the Attorney General, Ford said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. We lost contact with his wire a short time ago. His GPS puts him exactly in this room. Where is Marcus Kane? Brooke blinked. Her brain was misfiring. Attorney General, I don't know who you're talking about. We only have local riffraff in here today. Just some vagrant in a hoodie who decided to fight a cop. The color drained from Agent Pierce's face. He looked at Ford. The hoodie, charcoal gray. Brooke felt a cold prickle of fear start at the base of her spine. Yeah, gray hoodie, dirty boots. He attacked me, so I neutralized him. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. It was the silence of a bomb counting down to 0. You neutralized him, Pierce repeated, his voice barely a whisper. I tased him, Brooke said, her confidence wavering. He's in the holding cell. Oh my God, Pierce muttered. He tapped his earpiece. Control, we have a code red. I repeat, code red. The principal has been assaulted by local law enforcement. Get medics to the Crowley County Courthouse now. Ford didn't bother with the radio. He drew his weapon, a sleek Glock 19, and pointed it directly at the floor. But his posture screamed combat ready. Open that cell now. Judge Garrick slammed his gavel. Now see here. You cannot come into my courtroom and brandish weapons. I will have you arrested. Ford spun on his heel to face the bench. Judge, shut your mouth. The man in that cell is the State Attorney General, Marcus Kane. He is the highest-ranking law enforcement official in this state. And if he is seriously injured, I will personally arrest everyone in this room for conspiracy against a state official. Sit down and shut up. Garrick's jaw dropped. The gavel fell from his hand, clattering onto the desk. Brooke stood frozen. The world was tilting on its axis. Attorney General, the guy in the hoodie. No, that's impossible. He looked like a nobody. I said, open the door, Ford screamed, shoving Brooke toward the holding cell. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled for her keys. She couldn't get the key into the lock. The metal jingled against the plate, a sound of pure panic. Move. Ford shoved her aside, took the keys, and jammed the master key into the lock. He threw the heavy door open. Marcus! Ford shouted, rushing into the dark, cramped cell. The gallery was on its feet. Phones were recording everything. This wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. This was history unfolding live. Inside the cell, Marcus Kane was sitting on the bench, his head resting against the cinder block wall. The blood from the gash on his forehead had dried into a crusty dark streak down the side of his face. His wrists, still bound tightly behind his back, were throbbing. When Ford burst in, Marcus opened his eyes. He didn't look broken. He looked angry. A cold, focused anger that was far more terrifying than shouting. Get these off me, Marcus said calmly, turning his back to Ford. Boss, are you hit? Ford asked, holstering his weapon and pulling out a key for the cuffs. Tased. Hit my head on the way down. I'm fine. Marcus grunted as the cuffs clicked open. He rubbed his wrists where deep red welts had formed. Did you secure the room? Pierce has the room locked down. Medics are on their way. Cancel the medics, Marcus said, standing up. He swayed slightly, and Ford grabbed his arm to steady him. Sir, you have a head wound. I said, cancel them, Marcus ordered. I don't want a stretcher. I want to walk out there. I want them to see exactly what they did. He wiped the fresh blood from his eyebrow with the back of his hand, smearing it across his cheek. It made him look savage. He adjusted his hoodie, pulling it straight. Give me your phone, Marcus said. Ford handed it over. Marcus dialed a number. It's Kane. I'm at the Crowley County Courthouse. Activate the corruption task force. I want the building surrounded. No one leaves, not the judge, not the clerk, and definitely not the bailiff. We're doing this live. He hung up and looked at Ford. Let's go. When Marcus emerged from the holding cell, the courtroom went dead silent. He didn't look like a vagrant anymore. Despite the hoodie and the dirt, he carried himself with an aura of immense power. He walked past Brooke Harlan. She was pressed against the wall, her face the color of old ash. She was trembling so hard, her utility belt was rattling. Marcus didn't stop at the defendant's table. He walked straight through the gate, past the prosecutor, and stood directly in front of the judge's bench. Judge Garrick was pale, clutching his chest. Mr. Attorney General, I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when you spill coffee on someone, Judge. Marcus's voice boomed. He didn't need a microphone. Assaulting a citizen for sitting in a public seat is not a misunderstanding. It is a civil rights violation. He turned slowly to face Brooke. Officer Harlan, he said. Brooke flinched. Sir, you resisted. I felt threatened. I have the audio recording from the wire I was wearing. Marcus tapped his chest. I didn't resist. I was leaving. You attacked me because I bruised your ego. You weaponized your badge because you thought I was nobody. He took a step toward her. The gallery held its breath. That is the problem with people like you, Brooke. You think the law applies to everyone but you. You judge people by their clothes, by their skin, by their zip code. You thought a man in a hoodie couldn't possibly know his rights. You thought you could beat him, cage him, and lie about it, and no one would care. Marcus pointed to the blood on his own face. Look at this. This is what you did. But here is the twist you didn't see coming. You didn't just attack Marcus Kane. You attacked the state. He turned to Ford. Agent Ford, please place Officer Brooke Harlan under arrest. On what charges? Brooke squeaked, tears finally spilling over. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, filing a false police report, deprivation of rights under color of law, and kidnapping. Marcus listed them off like he was reading a grocery list. Ford moved in. He wasn't gentle. He spun Brooke around, grabbing her wrists. You can't do this, Brooke screamed, looking at the judge. Judge Garrick, do something. I was following your protocols. Don't bring me into this, Garrick shouted, trying to distance himself. Marcus pivoted back to the judge. Oh, you're in this, Vance. Deep in it. My office has been receiving complaints about this courtroom for some time. Excessive bail, racial profiling, forced plea deals. I came here today to see if it was true. You sat there and watched her tase a man for walking away. You sanctioned it. Marcus leaned his hands on the judge's bench, staining the polished wood with a smear of blood from his hand. I'm filing a motion with the Judicial Oversight Board this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, Your gavel will be a paperweight. You're suspended, pending an investigation. The courtroom erupted. The people in the back, the poor, the tired, the ones who had been bullied by Brooke and Garrick for years, started cheering. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a roar of vindication. Order, order, Garrick yelled weakly, but he had no power left. Agent Pierce stepped forward. All rise, he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. This court is now a crime scene. Everyone, stay where you are until statements are taken. As Ford clicked the handcuffs onto Brooke's wrists, the same cold steel she had used on so many others, she looked at Marcus one last time. I have a pension, she sobbed. I have years. Marcus looked down at her, his expression unyielding. You should have thought about that before you pulled the trigger. Ford began to march her out, the same walk of shame she had forced hundreds of people to take. But as they reached the aisle, the double doors opened again. This time, it wasn't federal agents. It was the press. The local news vans had arrived, alerted by the police scanner chatter about an officer down and the attorney general involved. Cameras flashed blindingly bright. Brooke Harlan, the tyrant of Crowley County, was dragged out into the harsh light of day, weeping in cuffs, while Marcus Kane stood in the center of the room, bleeding, battered, but undeniably the victor. But the nightmare for Brooke wasn't over. The legal system she had abused was about to grind her into dust, and Marcus had one more surprise waiting for her. The drive to the county jail was a route Brooke Harlan had driven hundreds of times in her patrol car. She knew every pothole, every turn, but today she wasn't driving. She was in the back of a federal unmarked SUV, separated from the agents by a thick polycarbonate divider. Her wrists were cuffed behind her back, the metal biting into her skin every time the car hit a bump. She tried to lean forward. Hey, can you loosen these? She yelled at the glass partition. I'm losing circulation. Agent Ford didn't even turn around. He just turned up the radio. When they arrived at the precinct, her precinct, Brooke expected a professional courtesy. She expected the blue wall of silence to protect her. She thought the boys in blue would rally, slow walk the paperwork, maybe lose the evidence, and let her go with a slap on the wrist. She was wrong. As she was marched into the booking area, she saw the shift commander, Sergeant Dale Novak. They had worked together for years. They had been to barbecues at each other's houses. Dale, Brooke cried out, struggling against Ford's grip. Dale, tell these feds to back off. You know me. This is insane. Novak looked up from his desk. His face was pale. Standing next to him was a tall, severe-looking woman in a suit, the assistant U.S. attorney who had just arrived on site. Novak didn't smile. He didn't offer help. He looked at Brooke with a mixture of pity and fear, then looked away. Process her, Sergeant, the assistant U.S. attorney ordered. By the book, no favors. If I see anyone slipping her a coffee or a phone, they'll be named as co-conspirators. Yes, ma'am, Novak mumbled. Dale, Brooke screamed as Ford pushed her toward the intake desk. You're going to let them do this to me? For what? For some guy in a hoodie? That guy is the Attorney General, Brooke, Novak hissed, finally looking her in the eye. And you didn't just tase him. You triggered a federal audit of the entire department. They're seizing the logbooks. They're checking the body cams from the last few years. You just sank the whole ship. Brooke went cold. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had become a radioactive isotope. Her colleagues weren't looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with hatred. She was the reason their pensions were now at risk. The indignity of the booking process was systematic and brutal. Brooke had forced thousands of people to go through this, laughing as they cried or complained. Now it was her turn. Shoes off. The intake officer, a rookie she had bullied just recently, said flatly. You can't be serious, Brooke snapped. Shoes off. She kicked off her boots, rings, watch, belt. She stripped them off, slamming them into the plastic bin. Turn around, hands on the wall. I'm not getting patted down by a rookie. Do it, or we add a non-compliance charge, Ford warned from the corner. Brooke complied. She felt the rookie's hands patting her down, checking for contraband. It was invasive. It was humiliating. It was exactly what she had done to grandmothers and teenagers alike, without a second thought. Then came the mugshot. She stood against the gray height chart. The camera flashed. That image, her face red, mascara running, hair disheveled, would be on the front page of every newspaper in the state by morning. As she was being led to a holding cell, the doors to the station opened. Marcus Kane walked in. He had been treated by the paramedics on the scene. A white butterfly bandage was taped over his eyebrow, and his lip was swollen, but he had changed out of the dirty hoodie. He was now wearing a suit brought to him by his team. He looked every inch the powerful prosecutor he was. The station went silent. Cops stood at attention. Marcus walked slowly toward the holding area. He stopped in front of Brooke. She looked small now, stripped of her belt, her badge, and her weapon. You wanted to know who I was, Marcus said quietly. Now you know. I didn't know it was you, Brooke stammered, her voice trembling. If I had known that, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp as a razor, is exactly the problem. If you knew I was powerful, you would have treated me with respect. Because you thought I was weak, you treated me like an animal. Justice isn't about who you are, Officer Harlan. It's about what you did. He turned to Agent Pierce. I want her locker searched now. You can't do that, Brooke shrieked. I have rights. You need a warrant. I am the Attorney General, Marcus said coldly, and this is an active crime scene investigation regarding the assault of a state official. We have probable cause. Ford and Pierce took a crowbar to Brooke's locker in the squad room. The metal screeched as the door popped open. Inside, they found the usual gear: spare uniform, hairspray, a gym bag. But on the top shelf, hidden behind a stack of manuals, was a small, locked metal box. Open it, Marcus ordered. They busted the lock. Inside wasn't evidence of the assault on Marcus. It was worse. Inside were bundles of cash held together by rubber bands. 20s, 50s, hundreds. And along with the cash, there were pieces of jewelry, cheap gold chains, watches, wedding rings. Novak gasped. What is that? It's a trophy box, Marcus said, picking up a gold watch. He turned it over. It was engraved, to Michael, love, Mom. These are items she confiscated from defendants and never logged into evidence. She's been robbing the people she arrests. Grand larceny, Marcus added to the list. Corruption, tampering with evidence. He looked at Brooke, whose eyes were wide with terror. You're not looking at probation, Brooke. You're looking at years. The Crowley County incident had become a national firestorm. The video of the tasing, leaked by a spectator in the courtroom, had millions of views. The image of the peaceful man in the hoodie being electrocuted by the screaming officer became a symbol of police overreach. But the real drama was happening behind closed doors. Marcus Kane had recused himself from the actual prosecution to avoid a conflict of interest, handing the case to a special prosecutor from Chicago, a shark named Preston Vale. But everyone knew Marcus was the architect of the strategy. Brooke Harlan was sitting in a conference room with her court-appointed lawyer. The police union had refused to pay for her defense, citing gross misconduct outside the scope of duty. She was on her own. "They're offering a deal," her lawyer, a tired man named Mr. Baxter, said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "Plead guilty to assault and civil rights violations. They dropped the larceny charges." "Years." Brooks slammed her hand on the table. "I'm a cop. I can't go to prison. They'll kill me in there." "You were a cop," Baxter corrected her. "Now you're a defendant. And Brooke, the evidence is overwhelming. The video, the cash in your locker, the testimony." "Testimony from who?" Brooks sneered. "My guys won't talk. They know better." Baxter sighed. He pulled out a deposition transcript. "You haven't been watching the news, have you? What is this?" "It's Judge Vance Garrick's deposition." Brooke froze. "The judge? He's on my side. I was following his rules." "Judge Garrick," Baxter read from the file, "has accepted an immunity deal in exchange for keeping his pension and avoiding jail time for his own corruption charges. He has agreed to testify against you. He claims that you were a rogue agent who frequently used excessive force without his knowledge and that he was terrified of you." "That liar!" Brooks screamed, throwing the file against the wall. "He told me to clear the court. He nodded at me. He watched me do it for years and laughed." "It doesn't matter what the truth is," Baxter said grimly. "It matters what he can prove. And right now, he's painting you as the monster to save his own skin. He's the star witness for the prosecution." "You too," she screamed at the thought of Garrick. "You're coming with me, Vance. We're going to hell together." The sight of the two tyrants, the brutal enforcer and the corrupt judge, both in chains, being led away to the same transport van, was an image that would be printed in history books. Marcus Kane watched them go. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Elena Grant, the young public defender who had tried to help him on that first day. "You did it," she said, looking at the empty bench. "You actually cleaned house." Marcus touched the faint scar above his eyebrow. "We took out the trash, Elena. Now comes the hard part, keeping it clean." He walked out of the courthouse and into the rain. The reporters were shouting questions. The cameras were flashing. But Marcus didn't stop for interviews. He got into his car, took a deep breath, and finally, for the first time in a long while, he smiled. The system was broken, yes, but today, just for today, the good guys had won, and karma had delivered a strike that no one in Crowley County would ever forget. And that is the incredible story of how one arrogant officer and a corrupt judge learned the hardest lesson of their lives. Never judge a book by its cover, and never assume you are above the law. Brooke Harlan thought her badge was a shield that would protect her from consequences. But she forgot that true power doesn't come from a uniform. It comes from integrity. In the end, the very system she abused was the one that locked her away, proving that justice might be slow, but it always arrives. If you enjoyed the story of instant karma and justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to remind them that karma is always watching. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.